Worship is an integral part of society and has existed since time immemorial. Worship takes on many forms. It is performed in places specially designed to pray, such as synagogues, churches, mosques, and temples, and for some, it can even manifest in the form of an instinctive response to a crisis. In a recent survey conducted in the UK, just over half of all adults engage in some form of prayer. But why do we worship? Who do we worship to? And are our supplications ever answered? The Review of Religions embarks on a journey to explore the significance of worship in our society.
We live in a world that's increasingly becoming a global village. We're here in central London and we can experience so many cultures, traditions, languages, foods. In the same way, there's so many religions and places of worship. Just asking the public, do they still worship? How do they worship?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to you to worship?
So I actually live in the UAE. So I live in the Middle East, and I actually go to an Anglican church. So I attend every Friday because there the weekend is Friday and Saturday.
Sure. Do you think that's true in your case?
No. To be frank, sorry. No. Been through some quite difficult times, but no.
You said you're an atheist, but do you feel then that even though you don't believe in God, that there is an intrinsic yearning to worship?
There is a yearning in every human being to want to do better than what they are.
Be on the lookout for an opportunity to improve the quality of life of any person. And in doing so, you can bring God's consciousness into the world more and more, until hopefully one day the consciousness of God will so overwhelm the human hearts and minds of people, there will be no longer any evil in the world.
But what does worship actually mean? What does it entail? I mean, if we're worshipping one God, then why are we worshipping in so many different forms? After speaking to different people on the streets and hearing their views, I set out to find out more by going to the actual places of worship and speaking to various faith leaders about the significance of worship in their faith.
In Judaism, we are taught to pray 3 times a day. We have the morning service, we have the afternoon and evening services. Most prayers, as I say, are either then sitting or standing. We don't kneel except for one particular word, one particular prayer at one time of year, which is the Day of Atonement on the Yom Kippur, and even then it's just usually the person taking the service that will prostrate himself.
We do not actually use the word worship, we rather use the word pay respect. And because the way we do is to show respect, is to show appreciation. Meditation doesn't mean that you just sit down with the eye closed. Meditation means you apply mindfulness in whatever action you do. For example, when you walk, we walk with mindfulness. So we walk slowly. When we come here to learn meditation, we walk slowly. We say right moving, left moving. So that is the way to develop mindfulness. And then when we come to do sitting meditation, we normally sit with the eye closed and then we observe the rising and falling movements of the abdomen.
So if I go to worship in my local Church of England church, there will be little cushions that I can take off the back of the pew and I can kneel for prayers, for example. In our church here, we don't have that tradition, we sit for prayers. So our physical expression here is we sit to pray and we stand to sing. And that's kind of how that plays out with us.
Where the physical essence is concerned, a Muslim is asked to do 5 compulsory prayers, but they're all slightly different in the way they are performed. The 3 main postures, as it were, one is a standing position, where the Muslim stands, and that's almost representing the fact that you are ready to accept anything that God is giving to you. The second is almost a bowing, and this bowing represents a concept of almost you're physically leaning towards God, but it also inculcates a spiritual leaning towards God as well. Along with that, there is also the final posture. There's many other postures involved, but these are the 3 main ones, which is the prostration. And this is literally when you're prostrating yourself before God, before the threshold of God, and saying, God, I am here to accept anything that you wish to give me.
Having learned about the varying forms of worship, I realized that worship in whatever form it exists entails some sort of physical element. But I was intrigued to know how worship affects the soul and how it impacts on the wider society.
I think that's a really interesting question. I can so easily convince myself that I'm it.
Sure.
You know, and all the messages of society are that I'm the most important thing in this world, I'm the most important thing in my world. And the act of worship says, no, there is something other. There is a God, there is a force of love and grace and truth that is bigger than me. So when I come before God and in communion with others offer worship to God, I think I am taken out of myself in a very helpful way, that I no longer am the most important person in this universe, and maybe there is a God who is bigger and better than I am, who is worthy of devotion and worship.
If you know the difference between right and wrong, and you always try to do that which is right without causing harm or distress to anybody else in the process, doesn't matter what name you give God, it doesn't matter whether you're in your front room or in a place of worship in the street, you're a good person. Not all people that attend a synagogue or a church, or may I say a mosque, are good just because they've attended the place of worship. There's a lot more to it. And perhaps the road that we go down is that inside, in the soul, you have to prepare it at all times for its eventual journey up to heaven.
You are mindful of your action, you're mindful of your speech and your thought. So mainly, the meditators will help people to be mindful of their action. When they walk, when they travel, they can apply mindfulness. For example, before leaving the train, if they are mindful, they won't leave their belonging behind, or they won't follow because they do it with mindfulness. And if they are in a hurry, perhaps they forget something in the train, they drop something on the floor, that happens. That's because you lost mindfulness.
The unity not only of the leader or the imam who's leading the congregation in prayer, but also the rows where we stand shoulder to shoulder. All people, regardless of your income, regardless of your background, your ethnicity, your creed, your colour, you're standing shoulder to shoulder. And that simplifies a congregational and your societal importance, as it were, which is very important in Islam.
And is reflected in the prayer itself.
Indeed, indeed. And the idea is that you take this concept of congregation and brotherhood, you take this concept of leading a congregation and following one leader, one imam, into the rest of society. By coming to the mosque, you encapsulate not only the unity of God, but you encapsulate that social responsibility and that essence of brotherhood and sisterhood, which is so much needed in today's society. So there is this spiritual and inner and very personal conversation which you're supposed to be having with God. And that can be achieved in a whole variety of different ways. So for example, here when we see, even on top here, you know, you mentioned before that there's not many things and it's very plain. But one thing that stands out is
graphic text here.
Indeed, yeah. So this says, "Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub," that surely the comfort of the hearts is in the remembrance of God. And we believe that's a very, very important thing, because that means that people in their own ways, in their own forms of prayer, they build that contentment and that relationship with God, which of course is the strongest here when you pray behind an imam, behind a congregation, behind a dedicated space for the worship of God. But of course then that essence and that spirit is taken out into the wider world, where people endeavour on a daily basis to build that relationship with God and continue to work on that as well.